Right now, this conversation around Jalen Hurts is dangerously close to getting twisted, misread, and flat out hijacked by people who want a simple answer to a complex problem, because on the surface, it looks like the Eagles beat up a helpless Raiders team and everyone should calm down. But underneath that box score is a much louder, much more uncomfortable truth that Stephen A. Smith put right on the table, whether fans want to hear it or not, and that truth is this: the Eagles were never broken in the way people claimed. They were confused, and confusion is far more dangerous than failure, because confusion leads to panic, panic leads to overcorrection, and overcorrection is exactly what nearly derailed this season. The outrage last week wasn't just about 4 interceptions or one ugly Monday night performance, it was about fear. Fear that Jalen Hurts had lost his grip on who he is, fear that the Eagles were chasing style instead of substance, fear that a defending champion was unraveling in real time. And when Stephen A. dismisses the Raiders game as a glorified bye week, people hear disrespect, but what he's really doing is forcing a harder question into the spotlight, a question that hits Jalen Hurts directly in the chest. Do you know who you are when the noise gets loud and the margin for error disappears? Because nobody is debating whether Hurts can throw touchdowns with no turnovers against a bad team. The debate is whether this version of the Eagles, the one that ran the ball 47 times, slowed the game down, protected the football, and leaned into defense, is the version that can survive January. And if that answer is yes, then this league might have a bigger problem than it realizes, because that means the Eagles didn't fix their offense by adding something new, they fixed it by stripping it down, and that should terrify everyone watching. Before we go any further, let's be clear about what actually happened and why it blew up the way it did. Philadelphia snapped a 3-game losing streak with a 31-0 demolition of the Raiders. Their first shutout in 7 years, Jalen Hurts threw 3 touchdowns with 0 turnovers after being ripped apart for his previous performance. And suddenly the same team people were ready to bury was breathing again. Hurts himself admitted they'd been winning without a clear offensive identity. And that statement alone tells you everything about the internal tension that's been building all season. Stephen A. and the panel didn't celebrate, they interrogated it, and that's why this discussion matters right now. If you're enjoying this kind of real talk, go ahead and subscribe, drop a like, and stay in the conversation, because this isn't about one game, it's about whether the Eagles have finally accepted who they have to be. Stephen A. As stance is blunt and unapologetic, beating the Raiders proves nothing, and emotionally he's right, because the Raiders were awful, historically bad on offense, and functioned more like a scrimmage opponent than a measuring stick. But strategically, this game mattered in a way that goes far beyond the opponent. The Eagles didn't just win, they declared a truce with reality. They stopped pretending every game needed to be a quarterback showcase. They stopped forcing risk into situations that didn't demand it. And they stopped listening to the outside noise telling them they needed to look explosive instead of effective. When Stephen A. says the real test is Buffalo, he's not dismissing what happened. He's framing it. Because Buffalo will demand discipline, patience, and emotional control. And those are exactly the traits the Eagles abandoned during their skid. What people miss in this argument is how fragile confidence really is inside an NFL locker room. 3 straight losses with turnovers piling up don't just hurt the standings, they infect decision-making. Suddenly players want to prove points, coordinators want to silence critics, and quarterbacks feel pressure to validate contracts and reputations. That's when identity gets blurry, and that's exactly what Hurts admitted without spelling it out. Running the ball 47 times wasn't just a tactical choice, it was a psychological reset. It told the locker room that winning ugly still counts, that dominance doesn't have to be loud, and that the defense can be trusted to carry weight. Stephen A.'s so-called negativity is actually a warning label. He's saying don't confuse relief with resolution. He's saying don't crown a resurrection because the opponent was lifeless. But here's where the conversation gets uncomfortable for the skeptics. The Eagles didn't need to prove anything to outsiders in that game. They needed to prove something to themselves. They needed a game where they could line up, execute without panic, and remember that protecting the football is a skill, not a concession. The fact that Hurts operated under center more than at any point this season matters. Not because it guarantees success, but because it shows a willingness to adapt instead of insisting on one version of offense. Stephen A. keeps coming back to Buffalo because Buffalo will expose whether this was a one-week ceasefire or a permanent change in philosophy. But even he acknowledges something crucial. This is the Eagles' formula. Defense, low-risk offense, selective aggression. This is why he's been criticized earlier in the season, and now suddenly reality is catching up to his argument. When the Eagles tried to raise their risk profile, turnovers exploded and losses followed. That's not opinion, that's observation. The irony is that people accuse Stephen A. of being harsh, but he's actually protecting the Eagles from themselves by refusing to let one blowout rewrite the story. At the same time, others on the panel point out something equally important. The noise stopped. For 1 week, the pressure cooker cooled. That matters. Players don't perform in a vacuum. When local radio is sarcastically applauding first downs, something is broken emotionally, not schematically. That 16-play opening drive wasn't about the Raiders, it was about re-establishing control. Eating clock, imposing pace, and refusing to hand momentum to critics is how teams stabilize. The disagreement on set isn't about whether the Eagles can win this way, it's about whether they can accept that this might be the only way they should. That's where Jalen Hurts sits at the center of this storm. He's capable of shootouts, but he doesn't need to live in them. His rushing decline earlier in the season wasn't a weakness, it was preservation, and now, as the calendar turns, reincorporating that element selectively could be the final piece. The danger, as Nick pointed out, is cohesion. An offense can't be a collection of good ideas that don't connect. Under center, play action, controlled quarterback runs, and calculated deep shots have to feed each other, not compete. The Raiders game worked because the Eagles simplified the picture. Stephen A's skepticism doesn't deny that. It challenges whether they'll stay disciplined when the lights get brighter. And that's the real controversy here. Not whether the Eagles beat a bad team, but whether they have the emotional maturity to resist the temptation of ego football. Because the truth is, the league doesn't care how talented you are if you keep handing it the ball. Defense and restraint win in January, and the Eagles know that because they've lived it. Stephen A isn't saying Jalen Hurts isn't ready for a Super Bowl. He's saying being ready means knowing when not to chase applause. Buffalo will test their patience, not their flash. And if the Eagles walk into Orchard Park and play their game without flinching, then this conversation flips instantly, not because of one win, but because of sustained identity. Until then, the skepticism stays, not as disrespect, but as accountability. The Eagles didn't announce their return with fireworks, they whispered it with discipline, and whether that whisper turns into a roar will be decided when excuses disappear and execution is all that's left.